Hello YouTube. So this video is going to be about the 10 Mahavidyas, or the Dasam Mahavidyas as they would be called in Sanskrit. And yeah, I apologize for my hair being a mess. It's actually quite late where I'm at, and this is like at least the 10th take of this video. So yeah, but I'm gonna sit here all night if I have to, but I will complete this video. So yeah, the um, the Mahavidyas are a group of 10 Tantric goddesses, and when I say Tantric, I mean that are part of Tantric spirituality, and by that token are not really considered a part of mainstream Hinduism, even though they may, some of the goddesses do enjoy a pretty solid cult, or a group of followers. They do, but they're still not considered part of modern day mainstream Hinduism. Not really. um, as with everything else that's tantric, tantra as a spiritual practice, it does celebrate the other. It celebrates the outcast, the supposed so-called deviants. It also celebrates feminism and the divine feminine in a pretty big way. And I think the 10 Mahavidyas do reflect a lot of those qualities, a lot of those perspectives. Um, I'll start with reciting the names of the 10 Mahavidyas, and yes, there is a particular order in which the names are generally recited. And no, I'm not really sure why the order is the way it is. I'm sorry. I really have not been able to find a reason, but so anyway, from the first to the 10th, here are the goddesses. It's Kali, followed by Tara, Tripura Sundari, Bhuvaneshwari, Chinnamasta, Bhairavi, Dhumavati, Baglamukhi, Matangi, and then finally Kamala. Um, it's you know the Mahavidyas, in terms of the legends that you have about them and the stories around how they were first. Hindu deities generally tend to have a story as to how they were first seen in the world. Most Hindu goddesses, we gods or goddesses, we say that we have at least a crore of them, and we do if you count individual names like that. But generally, they're considered aspects of one main god. So, for example, you would have Vishnu, who incarnates himself into 10 different gods. You have Krishna, you have Ram, and so on and so forth. But they're all aspects of Vishnu. Uh, Similarly, you have Parvati, Durga, Kali, um, etc., etc., who are all aspects of the same goddess, Shakti or Devi. So you do have that recurrent theme, so to speak. And it's kind of interesting as to how we basically have one or two stories about stories, legends, myths, whatever you want to call it, about how the 10 Mahavidyas were first seen in this world, how they first came to be. And all of those stories, I think, the common theme that recurs in those stories, and I will talk to you about those stories, and you'll hopefully come to the same, you'll see the same pattern yourself. um, the common theme about them is that they tend to talk about, the relative superiority, I'm sorry, it's late, superiority of the feminine as opposed to the masculine. They talk about the feminine, or the woman, taking the active position in a relationship, or in life. That's sort of like the common theme. So the first The first story, the first origin story for the Mahavidyas, was when Shiv was married to his first wife, Sati, who was, of course, an incarnation of Shakti, or the eternal goddess. She was a human incarnation of the goddess, and she had married Shiv against the wishes of her father, Daksh, who was a staunch follower of Vishnu, and hence, he held Shiv in a lot of contempt. And looking at the allegory behind that, this really sort of foreshadows a lot of real historical conflict that happened between the Vaishnavas, who were followers of Vishnu, and the Shaivites, who were followers of Shiv. That is a pretty historical um, thing that happened. Those are historical events. You had a lot of conflict. Wars were fought over and between these two groups of Hindu followers. So that is basically a precursor to that Vaishnav Shaivite conflict. So, anyway, Sati was born to a Vaishnav and married Shiv without her father's consent. And that led to a lot of conflict between Sati and her ancestral family. I mean, sure, she was happy with Shiv, but at the same time, she was really, really unhappy. She used to be quite unhappy about not being able to reconcile with her family, with her parents and her siblings and whatnot. So it's said that there was this one time when Sati wanted to go back to her father's house. She wanted to visit them again. And Shiv wanted to stop her, saying that, it would not look good because she had not been invited. And, it would sort of be impolite, or it would be impudent, I think is a good word. It would be impudent for her to go to her father's place when, he had made his displeasure over her decision quite clear. And that sort of really angered the goddess. And yes, she was human, but she was a goddess. It angered the goddess Sati because uh, to her, Shiv was getting in between her and her family, and which was a place that he had no right to be in. And it's said that Sati took the form of a huge, terrible dark goddess who was so horrific. Her face was so terrible to look at that even Shiv was scared of her. And that terrible dark goddess multiplied herself, and there were 10. And that is said to be the first definitive arrival of the 10 Mahavidyas. And that goddess is said to have told Shiv in no uncertain terms that he had no right to interfere in whatever business she had with her father and her mother. And she went off to her father's place. And there's a wholly different story about that. It's about um, how Sati eventually goes on to immolate herself, but that's a separate story. So that's one origin myth of how the Mahavidyas came to be. And like I said, it does talk about the woman taking an active role in the relationship and putting her foot down. Uh, Another story that's in the same vein is when Shiv and Parvati, in this case it was Parvati, uh, were at Kailash. They were sitting side by side, and suddenly Shiv gets up and starts to walk away. And Parvati asks him that, where is it that you're going? And Shiv is a little peeved off for whatever reason, and he says that, what does it matter to you? I just want to go away from you a little bit. And that really pisses off Parvati. That pisses her off, and she's said to have taken the form of Kali, and again she multiplies herself. And it's said that in whichever direction Shiv walks, you have one of the Mahavidyas appearing in front of him. And the allegory behind that is that no matter which direction he faces and no matter where he goes, he will always find the goddess, the great goddess, with him, because the entirety of creation is the goddess. There is no place in this creation you can go where you will actually be, where you won't find the goddess. That's what the story means. But that's also another origin myth for the Mahavidyas. Um, so that's one bit of it. As you can, like I told you, Kali is the first of the Mahavidyas, and all of them, in some shape or form, are generally associated with her. So, in that way, I guess you could say that Kali is the most primal aspect, or the most primal form of primal cosmic, whichever you want to call it, is the most primal aspect of the Mahavidyas, and the others are sort of more refined, uh, not refined so much as um, edited, perhaps would be a good word, edited or censored versions of that divinity, of the divine feminine. And I think a big aspect of the Mahavidya iconography is that it tends to juxtapose a lot of sexual imagery with pretty violent ones. Like, for example, you have the fifth Mahavidya, Chinnamasta, who means, Chinnamasta, the name means she of the decapitated head. So, Chinnamasta is a four-armed goddess who has decapitated her own head, and she's holding it up. So, for example, she's decapitated her head, and one of her hands is holding up her head. And from the severed neck, you have three streams of blood that's gushing or spurting out. One stream is entering the goddess's mouth herself, and the other two streams are being fed on by two of her female attendants. And you have a pretty strong imagery of some of it is cannibalism, other parts of it is self sacrifice. And what's interesting is that Chinnamasta is traditionally shown to be standing on top of a copulating couple. And the couple is generally identified with the god and goddess of desire, the god Kam, and the goddess Rati. So, you know, a lot of uh, Mahavidya iconography is like that. Other depictions of Kali or Tara show her either standing on Shiv or riding him. So and of course Kali is always depicted with severed demon heads or severed demon hands and so on and so forth. So I guess you could say that the iconography is heavily um, visceral. It's not really for the faint of heart, and even amongst modern day practical, not practical, practicing, even amongst practicing Hindus, the Mahavidyas are not goddesses who are usually approached, and not necessarily because people find them distasteful. They don't. I mean, at least I don't think any of the Hindus that I would know would say that the Mahavidyas are distasteful. But at the same time, they're not usually approached or invoked because people are afraid of them. People are afraid of their ferocious nature, and ferocity and violence are sort of part and parcel of their identity as a group and as goddesses. And they tend to celebrate things which are not considered technically pure or auspicious in Hindu culture. They celebrate aspects which generally tend to be not, like, for example, the seventh Mahavidya is the goddess Dhumavati, who is depicted as a widow. And as you guys know, that widows in Hindu culture are considered really inauspicious, to the extent that a lot of them used to be, not used to be, some of them still are. Widows in our culture are really abused. They can't participate in any uh, wedding ceremony, they can't participate in any um, religious functions, and so on and so forth. So to have a Mahavidya, to have a goddess as a widow, is, it sends a pretty powerful message um, as to how, you know just because something is said to be inauspicious does not necessarily mean that um, it should not be venerated. I think that's the closest that I can put that symbolism, that you know disease or uh, you know death and violence, those are things that you may not want them in your life. You might want to ward them away, but at the same time they're worthy of respect and veneration because they're still a part of nature. And I think that's like the underlying principle behind the Mahavidyas. That's sort of like the underlying message, that's the biggest takeaway that I find. Um, yeah, I hope that this was helpful for you guys. I hope that you guys liked it, or let me know if something wasn't clear, or if you want me to do a separate video on it. Maybe I'll turn this into like a series, and I'll do a separate video for each of the goddesses. I think that would probably be helpful. In that case, I can consider this to be like an introduction. So yeah, happy Saturday, happy Sunday, happy weekend, basically, wherever in the world you are. I hope all of you are good and doing well. It's pretty much time for me to turn in. Good night. Bye.